Hello everyone, it's Melissa Sweet here, public health journalist from Croaky. I have the great honour to be sitting in Minister Ken Wyatt's office with his colleague Ms Burney. We've all been at the launch this morning of the 20-year-on report from the Bringing Them Home report. Now I'd just like to invite our two presenters to tell us a bit about this morning and make any acknowledgements that you'd like.
Look, I just want to acknowledge all of the families who were affected because of the stolen generation era. My mother was and her family were part of the stolen generation, and this morning was a great opportunity to see people who were at the forefront of that work. Sir Ronald Wilson, Mick Dodson, but more importantly, each person who's taken the journey of struggling with not having been connected to family, to their language, to their culture, but still being resilient and being here today. And I do want to acknowledge Kevin Rudd for the apology, because that healing after the report was probably a second turning point for our people.
So I'm Linda Burney, and like Ken, went to the breakfast this morning. Just seems remarkable. It's been 20 years since the first report was handed down. I remember that so clearly. I was at Melbourne at the 1997 Reconciliation Convention, and Sir Ronald Wilson and Professor Mick Dodson released the report at that convention. And it really, to me, was a time when there was no one left in this country that could say, we didn't know. The line was drawn in the sand by the Bringing Them Home report. I joined with Ken and many others this morning, and I joined with Ken also in recognising every family that's been affected by these horrendous policies that were carried out by governments, where children were removed simply because they were Aboriginal in many cases. A shocking part of our history. And we have an opportunity now to look at the report 20 years on and do something substantial.
Would you like to reflect on where you were 20 years ago?
I was at the same convention, but I think the other thing that stuck in my mind was two of the state governments who were first to apologise. I vividly recall the television images of this Parliament reporting on that report, the emotions that were shown by members of the House, the Prime Minister at the time, and listening to our own people tell their stories during that process. And I vividly recall when they suspended the hearings in order to put into place counselling and support services, because, as Professor Dodson said this morning, the evidence giving and the truth telling opened up memories that were very raw. And when I read the report, and I read the report from cover to cover, you were left with a sense of numbness that this was our country. This was policies instigated by state and territory governments, and fundamental human rights were breached. And you don't lose those. They're like a visual image that stays within your memory. And I know Linda's had the same experience. Well, I'm not speaking for Linda, but I know that both of us have very visual images of where we were at the times of both the release of the report, but the events that occurred with state and territory parliaments and this parliament talking about the issue.
Well, Bob Carr, and I was lucky to be part of the New South Wales scene, was the first Premier, as Ken said, to apologise. And on the day that Kevin Rudd apologised in this place, I was actually sitting in the gallery, and just the emotions right across this country, the sense of connectedness across the country, where schoolrooms, church halls, local government councils, many parks, there were people gathering, many people in their lounge rooms to watch that apology. It was remarkable.
We've heard this morning that the lack of action on the 1997 report's recommendations has exacerbated the trauma for many and in fact led to intergenerational transmission of trauma. What would you both say from your respective positions is needed now to take forward the recommendations and to give the stolen generations and their families the resolution that they are seeking?
I think it's beholden on all governments to address the unmet needs within the Stolen Generation report. I've had a quick glance through the documents that were provided this morning, and I know and I'm confident that the Prime Minister's commitment this morning to addressing the issues will occur, and certainly listening to the Leader of the Opposition, there is strong bipartisan support from the two major parties. And equally, the Greens would commit to also ensuring that we address the unfinished business.
I mean, the three main issues that came out of this morning in terms of the report was a reparations arrangement, was training for people working with members of the Stolen Generation, and of course some basic research to find out how many people are left, what their needs are and where they are. And I think both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition were very genuine in giving a commitment to look closely and examine closely and work together on those recommendations. And the generosity, and I know that Ken would agree with me, the generosity of those old people, given what they've gone through at the hands of government, the hands of many institutions, to still put out their hands and say we can only do this together is something that I think humbles us all.
And I guess one of the messages today is that it's not only for governments to respond, but all Australians have some responsibility to step up. What would your message be to the wider community?
As I said at the time, this is Australia's history. Acknowledge that point in time at which, with the commitment to the process was genuine or not, it was a matter that did occur. And families that were torn apart, it impacted significantly. I still remember one of the families in WA who told his son never to get in the car and come into town. That morning he'd been playing in the muddy water near the tank, and he snuck into the back of the ute. They took him into town. The policeman saw him, so they took him. The father told the story later on that he covered those footprints with a piece of tin so they would never disappear. That was his memory of his son. They were later reunited, but for a long period of time, the pain of that loss was captured by the footprints in the mud. And that's how significant the impact was. But I think the other end of it, and Steve Larkin touched on this, is people going into aged care, because I've written to every aged care provider about children who were taken from families. Not only Aboriginal children from the Stolen Generation, but the Clan and others who were taken from their mothers. The kids from Liverpool, some of the English kids at Fairbridge, that when they come into aged care, we're going to have to seriously consider that as they experience dementia or a weakening with age, that they're going to have vivid memories of that earlier part of their life resurging back into their later years. So it's something that I know that there will be bilateral commitment to in terms of making sure that we address that in the future.
When did you write to the aged care sector about that?
It was about 2 months ago.
Right.
There's still a handful because I've signed every letter individually because I wanted to, and I wanted to show a commitment that we as governments and as parties in this parliament are committed to ensuring that our older Australians who helped build this nation are taken care of.
And Ms Wyatt, could I just ask why, when I asked for an interview with you, you did what is quite unusual for a politician, in that you suggested we invite other party members to come to the interview. Would you like to explain why you did that?
The reason I do that is because five of us have a shared journey. The five of us belong to our communities. We don't represent them, we are part of our community. And the journey that we've all had is not dissimilar. And in the history of the work we've done, we've interacted. I've known Linda for a long time.
Gosh, ages.
I won't tell the years, otherwise we'll tell our ages. Patrick Dobson, Malandiri I've only just met recently, but there's a depth of compassion and commitment to this issue by all of us, and that's why I will always encourage media to talk to the fatherless, because our common view is not different. We belong to political parties, but that does not get in the way of advocating for the things that our people need.
Is there anything either of you would like to add before we wrap up?
No, I guess one thing, and building on what Ken has said, is that this is a shared journey. We are responsible for making sure that all of us, are responsible for making sure that there is not a forgetting of this really dreadful part of our story. And truth-telling is hard, but we are getting better at it as a nation. And truth-telling about this era is very important. I'm a little bit older than Ken, but we're all of an age where, but for the grace of God, it could have been us. And, that impacts you.
Okay, thank you both very much for your time.